Hi, everybody. My name's Bernie, and I'm an alcoholic. I sit up here and I try to pretend that I'm real cool and not nervous, because you see, you get to hear speakers all the time like Clancy, and you get to hear people that have been sober 20 years and understand this thing perfectly and work it real good and can tell you how to work the program. And I think from time to time, for those of us who are in the program and haven't got 2 years less than God, that it's good for you to see somebody like me who is struggling on a daily basis to stay sober. And I am sort of beating around the bush so I can calm myself down so I can talk to you. And that's why I'm here. In fact, each time I get to talk, just before I get here, I keep saying to myself, you know, what are you doing here? Why are you here? And I remember, I think it's time that you remember who you are. And I think that's why I'm here. I think I have to be here to see all of you, to remember how very blessed I am. I hear people tell jokes about, you know, none of us ever looked forward to getting to belong to Alcoholics Anonymous. But dear God, am I glad I'm here now, because I sure don't look forward to ever going back to where I was. And so what I want to talk to you tonight, what I would like to tell you tonight is what it was like and what happened and what it's like now. But my sponsor told me I'm not allowed to do that. My first sponsor's now in the big meeting in heaven. My sponsor told me, he said, you're not allowed to do that. He said, what you must tell them is what you were like. And so I've got to tell you what I was like, what happened, and what I'm like now. And I try to avoid it as long as possible, because I sometimes think that maybe you won't think I'm as bad as what I really was. And yet I got to tell you, because I can't forget, because this is what keeps me sober, and I understand it every time I get back to a meeting, or I get to a meeting a lot, but when I get to do something like this, I remember I was going to speak to our Intergroup in Fresno, and I was standing at the corner, I was standing in the parking lot outside the Save Mart store, you know, and I was loading cases. I do nothing in moderation, so I don't drink anymore, so we drink pop by the cases. I have 17 cases of Pepsi-Cola and 20 of root beer in my garage, But I'm loading this stuff in the car, and it dawned on me that night I was going to speak, and I thought of it even when I was getting ready to speak to you. You know, tonight you got to get up there and you got to tell them what you were like. You got to tell them some of those things you did, you know, and you look reasonably respectable today. And you got to tell them what you were like. And I've got to be honest with you. The thought comes to mind, I don't want to tell you. But to stay sober, I've got to tell you. That's part of the price. It's a small price, because I've had such a heck of a good time. You see, I'm pretty brand new on this program. My sobriety date is January 21st, 1980. And so I'm still in this thing, and the reason why I think maybe newcomers can relate to me is because I'm still in this thing where I'm trying to work these steps on a daily basis, and I got to go to a lot of meetings, and I got to talk to alcoholics, and I have to work with newcomers, and I got to do all these things, because if I don't do it, I'm going to drink. And so I got to do all the things, and I've got to tell you who I am. So now I've avoided it as long as I am, so I'm going to tell you who I am. I was born in Chicago, Illinois. Fine Christian parents, good Christian parents. And from what I hear of an awful lot of speakers today, I'm not too sure that a good Christian home is a good place to be born anymore. But anyhow, I was raised and loved by my mother and dad. My mother never put me on the potty backwards. Nobody beat me. I was always taken good care of. Everybody loved me. My grandma and grandpa loved me, and everything was just beautiful, just beautiful. I got to tell you one interesting thing, though. My daddy was an alcoholic, and my uncle was an alcoholic, and my other uncle was an alcoholic, and my mother should have been the founder of Al-Anon. She just never joined. But I started out, and everything was just great, and I have nothing but loving remembrances of when I was a little kid. Nothing but loving remembrances. And this is part of my story, I think, because I used to think when I first got sober that my pride was due to that I thought I was better than you, and that's why I did everything. And so when I went to school, you know, I tried to study hard. I was one of those obnoxious little kids. I always did my homework. I always offered to clean the board. I'd empty the waste baskets. I was always running errands. I was a little altar boy. I did everything perfect. And I used to think I did that because I thought I was better than you. Since I've been in the fellowship, I have found out that the problem that I really had is I didn't think I was as good as you. I was almost certain of it, and I was sure that you wouldn't notice me and you couldn't possibly like me. And so I had to do everything perfect. I couldn't get 90 on the test. I had to get 100. And I had to do it right. And I never did anything I couldn't do perfect, or just I had to strive to do it perfect, and I got very upset if I didn't. There are two sports, for example, that I don't like, baseball and basketball. When you're a fat little kid like I was, you don't run gracefully up and down the basketball court, and I couldn't hit and do all that, so I just don't play them. But I love football and hockey, because all you got to do is hit people, hit them, and you run up and down the people, hit people, and you could play hockey or football. So I played on a little team, and I played center. And you could hit people, and it was okay. And I did all these things because I thought that maybe if I really studied hard, and if my teachers liked me, and I brought home good grades to my parents and my grandma and grandpa, and everything worked out okay, that you'd see me and you'd like me, and I'd be okay. And so I started to do that. I started to do that as a kid. And I did it, and everything worked right. Everything worked right. And it just came out perfect. And I decided, well, you know, I know something you don't try to do pretty much. When I was a little kid, I used to have my little Gilbert chemistry set, and I'd play with it, you know, and tell people I like chemistry, and they'd say, oh, that's wonderful. So I thought, I think I'll go be a research chemist. And I decided to be a chemist. And then I was a little Miss Goody Two-Shoes little boy, you know, at least on the surface. At least on the surface, I had something revealed to me, reminded me this week that I wasn't, but that's all right. And anyhow, I decided that I would also, maybe, you know, not many people wanted to run off and be a priest, so I thought I'll be one of them, too. And I thought if I did all these things, you would notice me. One of the things, I always said I was such a good little kid, but it was revealed to me this week. I used to go to church, and I'd go to church and go to communion every morning, but I remember now, and God, it's embarrassing to say it, but I guess I will, the first time I ever told anybody this. But I remember going to church every morning and then going over to this little store over there after I'd come out of church, and we'd go in, and instead of spending my money to buy my breakfast in the church hall like this, you know, a hot chocolate and a donut or something, we'd go over and drink Pepsi-Cola and steal comic books. God, I'll never forget that, you know, and I used to think, oh, I'd never steal when I was a kid. Yes, I did. I just never, it came to me this week when I was thinking about talking to you, and oh, Lord, I keep worrying about this. More will be disclosed to you because it keeps in. Geez, I hope not too much more comes back. But anyhow, I started doing this all the time, and I did everything, and everything worked for me. Everything. It was really great. It was really great. Everything worked. And I began to think, you know, Bernie, if you just work hard, you're pretty good. You're pretty good. And I never said thank you. I never thanked anybody for anything I did. I began to think that I could do it. And so I made up my mind I would do whatever I wanted to do. Now, I was kind of, I didn't like my daddy too much because I thought he was weak. Because he allowed my mother to run him. And I had an uncle who was a priest. My uncle, the priest, he's kind of funny. He was in Chicago. He never had his own parish or nothing like this. He's always getting in automobile accidents, one-car accidents, about 2 o'clock in the morning by himself. And we couldn't figure out what that was. And the poor guy was an alcoholic, just like me. And then I had another uncle who was a bookie. And he, in Chicago, you know, I mean, and he was an alcoholic too. So it was in the family. It ran well. And I didn't like this. I didn't like it one little bit. And I went off to school, and I got my degrees, and I conned everybody, and I kind of just manipulated people and got it going, and I was able to get I knew I wanted to go back to Chicago, and I knew that if I could get all this together real good, I could study for my chemistry degree, and I could study my theology, and I could get ordained and get my master's in chemistry at the same time, and I was pretty sure they shipped me back to Chicago. And so I manipulated them all just the way I should, real good, you know, and got it all set, and everything worked out perfect, and I really did want to be a good priest. I really did. And it all worked perfect, and I got ordained, and I never said thank you. Now, I was able to mouth this thank you pretty good. You know, I could, oh, thank you, God, but I knew who was really running it. I knew who was really in charge. I knew God was in on it, helping me out a little bit when things got tough. But I was the one that was accomplishing the things. And I never thanked him for what he did for me. I never thanked him for my family that were good people. I never thanked him for all the things I got. I never thanked him for the mind he gave me. I never thanked him for my education. I never thanked him for all the good things I had, because I thought that it was all due to my hard work. Well, I knew that this uncle of mine wasn't able to control his drinking, and I'd gone back to Chicago, and right away as a rookie teacher, they put me in charge of 15 people. What a place to put an alcoholic, you know. Put 15 teachers under me, because I was the only one that had the master's in chemistry, and I had 600 women in my mother's club that I ran, and they thought I was wonderful and all that, you know, and geez, I was falling into it. But I knew this drinking in my family was a problem, and I said, that will never happen to me. I will control my drinking. And so I decided, before you see, you don't drink in the seminary, at least not when I was going through. I don't know about these kids today. But anyhow, I decided before I started to drink that I would quit for a year to prove I could control my drinking. Now, if that isn't the disease waiting for the chemical to catch up, I don't know what it is. And so I went through that first year, and I proved I was better than everybody else. Nobody in my family was as good as me. And I did all this stuff, and I had a great first year teaching, and I loved my kids. I really did. I just loved to teach. I taught, and I ran homecomings and football games and did all these things and just loved it, and it was really great and wonderful. And I never said thank you for a single thing that came my way. Well, about sometime in June, I decided I'd try and learn how to play golf, and I went out to Westgate Country Club with a friend of mine by Al Hillebrand, name of Al Hillebrand. We went over on the west side and finished the first 9 holes and walked into the clubhouse, you know, and Al said, well, I think I'll have a beer, and I thought, well, my year's up. Well, it was only the school year. It was only 9 months, but that's okay. I'd proved I could quit for a year because I did it for 9 months, and I was better than these other people. I could control my drinking. And so I thought, yeah, I think I'll have one too. And I said, had to look good, you know. I didn't even know what to ask for. I said, give me that Miller's. That's a champagne bottle beer. I figured I'd have that, you know. And I used to say I had one. I find out that I must have had several, I guess. But anyhow, I went back out to the tee, and I drove the green. First time I ever did it in my life. And my friend said to me, Bernie, you did pretty good with that beer. And I said, yeah, I think I'll try that again. And that's my beginning. And I'm going to tell you some more. Now, I don't want you to think, because I don't want to be dishonest about this, that I never had alcohol before that. My mother would give me a little glass of wine when I was a kid, or I had some wine in school, but not drinking like you and I. I'm talking about drinking now, not will you have a little glass of wine. I'm talking about drinking, because I'm a real alcoholic. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not one of these people that smelled it and came into the fellowship. All right. Anyhow, I had this beer, and I thought that was very good. Well, now my year's up, and I can do these things, so all this happens now within about a week. I remember going over to Midway Airport, and I remember meeting somebody for lunch, and we went back over across the street to a restaurant there. I can't remember whether it's Cavarella's or Cavallini's. It's torn down now. They moved it. But we met this guy for lunch. We went in for lunch, and I'm sitting there, and they start ordering drinks, and this guy says, give me a Manhattan. And I thought, I never had one of them. That sounds pretty good. I'll have one of them. And once again, I used to say, I think I had one. I think I had 2 or 3 is what happened. Typical. And it was really good. Oh, gee, it was good. And I asked him, I said, how do you make that? How do you make that? And he said, well, not very sophisticated. You put 2 shots of bourbon and 1 shot of vermouth in there. I said, oh, okay, good. That's real good. That was really good. So on my way home in the car, now, I must have stayed up very late the night before because I was very sleepy going home in my car. But anyhow, I stopped at the liquor store, and I'd never been in one before by myself, but I walked in and I said to the man, I want a bottle of whiskey, because in Chicago we don't talk about bourbon and things like that, whiskey. And I said, I want a bottle of whiskey, and I had to look good because I didn't know what I was asking for, because these people are so kind in these stores. He said, what do you want? And what kind do you want? You could have anything you wanted. And I said, oh, well, this sounds good. I mean, Dad had it one time. I said, give me the bottle of that Seagram 7 Crown. That sounded kind of high class, you know. I have a bottle of that. And I said, and there's that little red wine. I can't remember the name. He said, vermouth. He said, yeah, that's right. Give me a little bottle of that, about half the size. And he said, okay. And I went home to my room. I went home and had a little nap because I was very tired from lunch. And I got up, and that night I got a great big snifter that I had in my room. It was really great. And I got a lot of ice, and I put it in it. And it was a big snifter. And I poured in the bourbon, and I poured in the vermouth. I think I did it about 2 batches. And I drank the whole thing that night. And it was wonderful. God, I loved it. It was warm, and it went down, and I just felt real good, and it's just beautiful. And this is the beginning of my lying about my drinking, because from that day until I got sober, I never would admit I had a hangover, you see, because a hangover meant you were weak, and I hated this weakness. And it used to drive Madonna nuts, because she'd say to me, Bern, how's your head feel this morning? How do you feel today? And I'd say, oh, wonderful, wonderful. I didn't care if I was worried about the flies walking on the ceiling. It's okay, it's okay. I would never admit I had a hangover. Absolutely never admit it. I just lied about my drinking all the time. And so then, about 2 weeks later, I decided I'd go over to the Veterans Hospital, and me and another guy, I don't tell you his name now because I think he belongs in our fellowship. But anyhow, we went over to the Veterans Hospital, and we were going to go visit somebody, and it was too early, and so, you know, what are you going to do if you got time? And this was a new experience to me, so off we go to the bar. And I didn't know what you were going to get at the bar, so I thought I'd try all these things, because these people are always saying, what do you want? What do you want? So I walked up to the bar, I remember this, and I'd seen some movies, and you see, I had to look good. I could never say to anybody, what do you think I ought to try, or should I couldn't do that. I had to look good so you'd like me, and so I saw these movies, and all these cool people would say, Scotch and soda. So I never had that. I'll have Scotch and soda, and we had several of those, and I went home that night and threw up, and I've never had soda since. It's terrible. And that's what I thought. That's what I thought. And on it went, on, and I began to just start drinking. Not as much, because it gets a lot worse, but I was starting now to understand, and I'd drink, and I'd had a little, I didn't know I was having blackouts, but I did. Well, I had this uncle on my mother's side who was, I was telling George about it, was a Navy flyer, and I always, you know, I had to be like him too, so I decided to go learn how to fly an airplane. And I learned how to fly, and I used to lie about this a lot too. I used to say, I never flew 24 hours between the bottle and the throttle, but for me, midnight was 24 hours. So I took off the first time I flew to California at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we drank till midnight. Well, we filled our glasses till midnight. I don't know what time we went to bed, but I always claimed I never drank 24 hours between the bottle and the throttle, and the lying, I just can't believe it. And God takes care of drunks and babies, and he sure took care of me, because I never grew up, and I was drunk an awful lot. And I learned to fly this airplane. Well, one day I was flying out of Midway Airport, and I wanted to fly at Midway. You see, I couldn't fly at little airports. Wanted to fly at the busiest airport in the world, because I wanted to land there, and I wanted to say, oh, look at that priest getting out of their airplane. Isn't that something there? And I'd say, look at me. And I thought that was terrific, you know, and you had to see me. I just couldn't. And I did all this and had lots of close calls. Well, you can imagine this drunk flying this airplane around, you know. I stopped to think of it. I landed at O'Hare one time, and the field was closed in the fog. I just happened to think of that. God took care of me on a regular basis. And we didn't drink after supper that day or something like that. It was awful, just awful. But God took care of us, and I just thought I was a good pilot. It never dawned on me who was taking care of me or what was happening, and I never said thank you. One night over the Illinois Toll Road, I lost my engine. And somehow or other, that airplane got landed in a little pea patch, and they shipped me off to Oklahoma. Do you know what day I got to Oklahoma? This is really remarkable. I can remember the day I got to Oklahoma real well. September 1st, 1959, I went to Tulsa. That's the day Oklahoma went wet, and I got there too. And these people in Tulsa, oh God, I love Tulsa. It was just a great town. Now, everybody in Tulsa doesn't do what I describe. And now, gosh, I just found out last time I was just in Tulsa about a month ago, I find out they serve liquor by the drink there now. But when I got there, you could only buy it in stores, and everybody carried around their little brown paper bag with their bottle in it. That's why I love the Okies. Dear God, I thought they were wonderful people. Because when I got there, and we'd go out for dinner, and you'd bring your little bottle and you'd sit down, and God forbid that you would leave the dinner table with it half empty, or, so you had to finish it. And so we would do that, and I just loved it. And I made up my mind. Now, I do believe this from the bottom of my heart. I hope to God this is never revealed. Sorry. But if he wants to reveal it to me, he can. But I really believe that I love those kids, and I love that school. I just love that school. But I made up my mind I would become headmaster of that school, and I did. And I made up my mind I would do all kinds of things. I raised lots of money for it, and I did all this thing, and I just loved that school. But something was beginning to go wrong. It was really beginning to go wrong in my life. I know what was happening is my life was getting to be one great big lie. I wasn't being honest. I wasn't being honest with what I was doing. I wasn't being honest with who I was. And I stayed there for a long time. I was there about 12 years, and I made up my mind on what I was doing, and I wasn't doing it to do a good job. I was doing it to build me up. Everything I did, I was doing to make me look good. And I don't like to admit that, but I'm afraid that's the way it was. Well, anyhow, it began to dawn on me that what I was doing was being terribly dishonest, and I was telling everybody that I wanted to be a celibate priest, and I didn't. And I couldn't be honest about it, and I made up my mind I was going to discontinue this lie, and I was going to be honest. And so I went to my superiors, and I even went to the guys that were teaching me at Tulsa University and all that, and I just said, I can't cut this anymore, I can't cut it. And so I left the order, and I went to Wisconsin, and there was a little girl that I knew when she was 13, and I was a rookie teacher, and she had grown up, and so I married her. I had to wait till she grew up, and then I married her. And then in the first year of my sobriety, God acts in mischievous ways, we adopted 2 teenagers. Now, God only allows that to happen to alcoholics, I'm telling you. We took our 2 teenage daughters to our first anniversary dinner. But I'm thrilled for that today because it just sort of put the whole thing together. And so I'm now in Wisconsin, and I go there, and all of a sudden, within 4 months, I'm principal of a big high school. I meet a priest that I've loved dearly since. His name is Father Childs, and he took me to the bishop, and I had my orders validated in the Episcopal Church, and I was an Episcopal priest, and I was back at the altar, and I was working in the church, and I was teaching this big public high school, principal of this big public high school, and everything was going my way, and I did it again. You see, if you just work hard, it all works, and if you use your willpower, which I did, it would all work fine. But I forgot to quit drinking. And so I started drinking some more. And now I'm beginning to see what the problem is. I obviously didn't see that it was my drinking yet. What I began to understand was that it was my job. Those people in that high school didn't appreciate me. They just didn't understand the pressure I was under, and with the kids these 2 teenage girls, and with this job and trying to work at this parish, and it was just too much. And so I'd have to relax at lunch and when I came home in the evening and have a couple of drinks to relax so I could go to sleep. And you know how that goes. And then I finally went to Kenosha. I got out of the school business again, and I went to Kenosha. And then the next thing I know, a year later, some people had recognized my talent again. And I said, thank you, Bernard, for putting in that much hard work. And, oh, yes, God, I want to thank you, too. And the next thing I know, I have my own parish in Kentucky. Oh, what a place to live. The mint julep. What a drink for an alcoholic to discover. Just a little ground ice and some mint and fill it up with bourbon. And that's it, baby. You can drink. And you see, the problem was, it sounds so ridiculous for me today to say this. A drunk who wants to drink respectably. I wanted to be respectable. And I didn't want you to know, I don't even know if I knew myself, that what I wanted was pure alcohol. And I discovered that these mint juleps You could be very respectable if you bought these silver julep cups, you see, because you can't see what's in them. So I told everybody I was having bourbon and water, and it was pure bourbon. I'd aspirate the water over it, and it was pure bourbon. Or I'd tell them I was drinking a Manhattan, and that sounded... You can't tell them I'm drinking a glass of whiskey. You got to tell them it's a Manhattan, and then you just pour 2 drops of vermouth in there and call it a Manhattan. And I began to drink real heavy on that. And I began to drink more and more and more. Now I'm going to tell you I'm a real alcoholic, because this little town, after I was there about 2 years, it was a lovely little town. God, it was beautiful and historic and old and very, very the Kentuckians, they wouldn't say it if you stepped in it, they're very, very proper. As long as you pull the shades or do something, it's okay. It depends upon how you behave, not what you do, but how it looks on the front, And so I had to keep up that. Well, I lived on this lovely little street in a little town called Versailles, Kentucky. And it's not Versailles, but they call it Versailles. And anyhow, this little town in Versailles, Kentucky, across the street is Happy Chandler, the former governor and commissioner of baseball. And it's all, and I have my old Kentucky home, this big porch with a swing on it, and a lovely lights to light up the porch and everything like that, But these people, they didn't understand my talent as a northerner. And so I had to relieve the pressure somehow. And it was them again. It just seemed like nobody seemed to be able to understand me and all my talent. And so I kept drinking. And I remember one night, and all the people that I knew, now everybody in Kentucky either doesn't drink this much, but everybody I got to know did. Everybody I got to know should have been in the fellowship, and some of them I think are going to die soon. But anyhow, I remember one night we were having a party. They were going to have a party for my daughter. She was going to get married. And Madonna was taking me, now, Bern, don't drink so much, don't drink. Oh, no, I'll be fine. Go upstairs quick, get 2 quick Manhattans, that's the big julep cups. Boom, boom, put them down so I could go to the party and be respectable. And then I sat there and I went through most of this party, and then most of them went home and only a couple of my drinking buddies are left there, and then baby we go after it, And the next thing I know, I'm shooting my mouth off and saying stuff that I shouldn't be saying, and they got me out of there, and I was drunk, and I got out in front of the house, and of course the ground was wet and slippery, so I fell down a few times, but but anyhow, and then Madonna got in the car and she couldn't do it the way I thought she should drive home, and so I told her to get out of the car, and I went around the car, and they tell me I fell down, but the next thing I remember is it's 10 minutes to 8 on Sunday morning, and I'm supposed to be on the altar at 8 o'clock in my church, and I'm laying on the bed fully clothed, and I jumped up and I ran in the bathroom and I looked in the mirror, and my face was full of blood. And my face was cut right here. I got a little scar here. In case I ever forget who I am, I just rubbed that little scar to remind me of this night. Full of blood. This lens is gone out of my glasses. I'm a mess. You can imagine what I look like, dear God in heaven. I thought the mirror'd break. And I ran back in the room and I yelled at Madonna and told her, to get over this and did all these things. And then I put all my dignity on, put these glasses on without any lens on this side, and gathered up my dignity and went over to church and told them as I was rushing out of church, I fell down the front stairs and landed on here and cut my face in. And they knew. Another time I came home, I was so drunk I couldn't get the key in the door and wet my pants all over the front door. Just terrible. Well, I knew what the problem was. It was those Southerners in that staid little town that didn't understand me. And so somebody called me from California and said, how would you like to come out here? And I came to California. I said, that's just it. And when I got out here, I found out what the problem is. Do you know what you people do here that we don't do back east? You just have a little white wine. That's all you need to have. And so I had a little white wine. That lasted about a week. And then I found out that wouldn't work. But here I was now in my proper condition. I'm in a fine parish in northwest Fresno, and it's just wonderful. And everything is just up to where it should be for me. And everything's going great, but something was wrong. I don't know what it was. Well, there's 2 guys that come into this thing. Boy, God acts in mischievous ways. He sent 2 seminarians that were in my parish from Kentucky, one of them ahead of me and one just came behind me. And the one that was ahead of me went to a little town in the valley. He's sober 3 years now. But he hadn't drank in 18 years. And he decided after he got ordained, you know, well, I'm telling you now, I'm a holy man, and I got all this put together, and I got this act, and I can say my prayers and use my willpower. And so he decided to try it. And 2 weeks after I got to California, he was crawling around on his hands and knees. And the bishop sent down somebody to help him. Guess who they sent? Goofy here. They sent me, and I run down there, and I prayed for him. And I'm not making fun of this, but I mean, I didn't know what to do, so I go down, I prayed on him, I told him the great story, you know, be a good man, show him who you are, say your prayers, and use your willpower. And then I ran back to Fresno and had a few drinks and settled down and relaxed. Anyhow, the bishop decided Fresno Community Hospital was going to put on a seminar, and it was called Ministering to Alcoholics. And I read the little thing, and I said, oh, that's very nice, and I threw it in the wastebasket, because I didn't need that, you see, because I knew I'd worked with alcoholics in Tulsa, and I had my friends that were in AA, and I knew how to do this. And so the bishop, though, he read the thing, and so he says, Bernie, you and Mazak are going to go down to the seminar. And I remember I wore this coat down there, and I went into that seminar. I was scared to death. But I heard about this thing, alcoholism, this disease. My friend also heard about this disease called alcoholism, too. And anyhow, December comes, Christmas, and I go through that. And every year I used to have this big Super Bowl party. I've had one every year. And so we had the Super Bowl party, and I had my big party, but the Wednesday night before the Super Bowl, my friend Father Mazak and his wife and another couple from the parish were over to our house, and I was being my usual obnoxious self and chipping away at Madonna and yelling at everybody and being a good host and getting everybody drinks. And my friend Al Mazak walked out of my house that night, and he said, I know what's wrong with Bernie. He's an alcoholic. And so he called Madonna the next morning and said, I want you to come over. Well, about a month before that, Madonna and I were talking about it after I'd gone to that seminar, and I said, you know, I got to do something about this drinking. I'm drinking a little too much. Oh, God. I'm drinking a little too much. I said, I got to do something about this. And she said to me, well, you're not an alcoholic, are you? And I said, oh, God, no. Oh, no. She said, I didn't think I were either. No. Well, anyhow, the day after the Thursday before the Super Bowl, Al calls Madonna over and he said, I want to see you. And she came into his office and he said, do you think Bernie's an alcoholic? And she says, you're damn right he is. First time in her life she ever said it. And so they plotted a little thing. And on the day after the Super Bowl, I knew I was going to do something about my drinking. I could control it. I've done it many times. I quit for Lent, all those things, you know. Don't say that disrespectfully. But I used to quit for Lent, and God, I look forward to the Beefeater Martini on Easter Sunday, not the resurrection. It's terrible. But anyhow, I decided on the Monday after Super Bowl, I went over to my office, and I remember coming home that day, and I'm on my way home, and I walked into my house, and I'm saying, today's the day I'm going to get my drinking under control. Today's the day I'm going to quit. I quit for a couple of days, God forbid. I always prayed, dear God, don't let me drink so much. I would never pray, don't let me drink. That's ridiculous. Don't let me drink so much. Don't let me get drunk. And I remember walking in the house. I can see it now. I walked in. I walked down a little tiny corridor, turned toward the kitchen, opened the cabinet, reached up, got a julep cup, opened the ice thing, threw in the ice, walked over, got the bourbon out, and said, I'll quit tomorrow. Well, I went over to my office that night and had a meeting, and when I got home, about 9 o'clock, there were a bunch of people sitting in my living room. There was Father Mazak and his wife, and there was another couple from the parish, and it was 9 o'clock, and they were kind of somber looking. They weren't laughing, or they weren't joking, or nothing. Looked like a wake or a funeral or something, you know, except Madonna was sitting over in the corner there in a chair. I can visualize this night as clear as the bell. She's sitting over there in the corner, and I thought, oh, thank God she hasn't been hurt or anything. And there was a kind of a bald-headed fat guy sitting over in one corner of the room, and I looked over at him, and I said, you know, you got to be cool. I said, I know you from somewhere. I know you. And he got up, and he started to walk across the room, and he put his hand out, and he said, my name's Ashley Dick, and I'm from Fresno Community Hospital. And I said, oh, my God, you're here for me, aren't you? I knew right now. I knew what they were going to do. I knew it, and I knew what... I said, my God, to myself, they're going to do an intervention on you. Now get this thing under control. They're going to try and make you say you're an alcoholic. They're going to throw you in that hospital, and you're going to have to quit drinking. So I knew what they did. They tell you all the rotten things you did, see. So I sat down. They said, you know why you're here? And I said, yes, I know. And I told them every rotten thing I could think of. I told them. The last party we had before... I got to tell you this, because if I tell you this, it reminds me who I am. The last party we had before we left Chicago and came, they threw a party for us up in Chicago, And we drove up to Chicago, and they had a party down in the den in my sister-in-law's house. The whole family was there, and I got drinking all night, celebrating. And at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, I don't remember what time, in the morning, I came out of a blackout, going to the bathroom over in the corner of this den, and God, it's embarrassing, but that's what kind of an alcoholic I was, a real one. And I told them about that, and I told them about how, all the drunks that I had. And they said, I thought, that'll let me off the hook. They'll think you know, and you can control it. And they said, we know, Bern. That's why we think you're so sick. I thought, holy Craig, they are serious about this thing. Jeez. So I went over, I got up. I remember walking over by a china cabinet like that thing sitting up there, and I'm facing with my back to them, and I said, tell them you'll quit drinking for a year. They'll believe it. It was terrible. My mind was just that alcoholic mind. Tell them listen, guys, I'm sorry I've hurt you so much. I didn't know my drinking had done so much harm. It just really hurts me that I've hurt you so bad. I'll quit drinking for a year. And they didn't say nothing. I said, what's the matter? Don't you believe me? And they said, no. Oh, God, I was in trouble. And then Mazak says to me, Bernie, we've gone to the bishop and talked about your drinking. I thought, oh, dear God in heaven, this is it. And then I remembered, I can con that bishop. I know I can. I had his private phone number in my pocket. But I made a serious tactical error here, very serious tactical error, because I thought to myself, I got up out of the chair. They didn't know what I was doing, I think, or they all had heart attacks. And I got up out of the chair, and now it's about 10:30, because I was really putting up a good fight. And about 10:30, and I get up to go to the phone, and I'm going to call the bishop and say, Bishop, there's a bunch of people here in my house who are telling me I got to go to the hospital for alcoholism. Now I'm going to quit my drinking, and I know he won't make me go to the hospital. And about halfway to the phone, I thought, what if that sucker Mazak's lying? And I called the bishop at 11 o'clock and told him there's a bunch of people in my house. And I went back and sat down, and that was a serious tactical error. Well, what began to happen, they told me then, if you don't go get help, I knew I was in trouble. If you don't go get help, they said you're going to lose your parish. I can handle that. I'll con somebody else into another one. And then we won't come and visit you anymore. I can handle that. Madonna's in about the position she was that night. And I knew that she loved me. And I knew what she was going to say. I didn't even want to hear it. I just didn't even want to hear it. Because I knew she loved me enough that she was going to say to me, Bern, either you get help or you're going to have to leave. And I couldn't even stand hearing that. And I sat down in my chair and I said, okay, tell me about it. And in an intervention, when some poor sucker says, tell me about it, they whipped out my suitcase, had it packed, had me in the car, and I was in the hospital. Didn't even know what happened to me. And I used to say I didn't know what happened, but I know what happened. It was the grace of God. And I believe from the bottom of my heart, the way it says in the book, that just that moment of clarity came over to me, and somehow or other, I let go. Just for that second, I surrendered. And this friend of mine, actually, I just had lunch with him last Tuesday. He's working for the Salvation Army now in alcoholism, but he said to me, I don't remember this, but he said on the way down in the car, he said, you said to me, I don't know what's going to happen, but at least I know this. I can take the mask off. The faking's over. And I remember getting down to the hospital. I got out of the car and I walked up. Now, here's what I saw as I began to walk into this thing. I saw a sidewalk that was 3 miles long, and over the entrance to this hospital was a big sign, and it says, abandon all hope, all ye who enter here. And I walked into that room that night, and they had told me, about these are very fine people in this hospital. Well, I walked in there. They were a bunch of sick people in that hospital that they expected me to associate with. They were a bunch of drunks. And my surrender lasted about that long. And I walked back there, and I asked them if I could sit up for a little while, and I got out the Reader's Digest, and I figured, if I read this, they'll notice me, and they'll see how smart I am, and they'll let me go soon. And I thought, and it's only 12 steps. I can take a test on that and pass it in 10 days without any trouble at all, and I'll get this thing put together, because I've got a degree and things like that, and it won't bother me, and I'll pass this course and be out of here. And they didn't listen to me. And I was extremely fortunate. Several things happened to me. And I heard a lady at the convention in Montreal say the thing that happened to me. And it really makes sense to me about what goes on. And it's what happened to me. My treatment was my admission of what happened to me. AA is my recovery. This is where I get better. And this is where I'm going to continue to get better. And I met two people in that treatment. I met a little gal they call my therapist. She was my drunk. She was a member of AA, and she damn well let me know it. And she sounded like a salty sailor, making a salty sailor sound like a panty waist the way she talked. She used to tell me she was cleaning up her language. I never knew it, but God, I loved her with a passion because she hated alcoholism and loved the alcoholic. And I'll never forget the second day, the first day, I think there's something that happened there, because that night I remember they put me in these god-awful blue seersucker pajamas. And they made me walk around in this hospital with men and women both there in these pajamas. And I'm not really too sure today whether my higher power or those blue pajamas keep me sober if I ever had to get back in them again. But anyhow, I remember laying down on that bed that night. And I kind of said, well, here you are, here you are. You've really screwed it up. And then I remember saying, dear God, help me to learn to live without this chemical. And I think it's the best prayer I probably ever heard said in my life. It was the first time I ever asked him, help me to learn to live without this chemical. Now, I don't know about you, but some of you might have gotten here not believing in God, and you say, well, you had it easy. You believed in God when you got there. I'd like you to try it as a priest sometime. If you're a drunken priest, it sure doesn't look too good from this side of the thing after you've been given all this. And oh, God, I was scared. I was really scared, and I didn't know what was going to happen to me, and I knew God was going to take care of all you guys. I knew he loved you, but I thought, you ungrateful sucker, after all you've been given, you don't have a chance. But I just said, please, please, help me to learn to live without this chemical, and I went to bed that night. And I think it was 2 days later, I was in group, and Edie turned over to me, and she says, how do you feel today? And I said, oh, God, awful, embarrassed, and just awful. And she said, why? And I said, for God's sake, Edie, I'm a priest, and I'm a drunk, and they ship me in here. And she said, man, you don't need to be embarrassed. You're sick. You've got a disease. That's all that's wrong. She said, she'd suck you in, like, trying to make her think she was being kind. Would you like to learn how to be sober? And I said, oh, yeah. I thought, this is the lesson I missed. They're going to teach me. And she turned to a little guy over in the corner. Not you, George. Little guy over here in the corner, and she said, Howard, tell him how to stay sober. And I looked at Howard. Howard was getting kicked out of there that day because he didn't have any insurance. He didn't look like he had enough sense to come in out of the rain to me then. He wasn't shaved. He didn't look intelligent. I don't think he could speak good English. And she asked him to tell me how to be sober. And he said, yes, ma'am. Don't drink, go to meetings, and pray. And she said, and you do them in that order. And I said, yes, ma'am. And that's the first time I thought, oh, God, how simple. And I began to do that. And I remember watching that clock, sitting in that room and watching that clock for 5 o'clock. And Tuesday night, they sent me to a meeting, and I went to a meeting. And the day went by, and I didn't drink. And then we went outside to a meeting, and they sent me, they didn't send me to a nice group with a hall like this. My first meeting that I went outside to was over at the West Side Fellowship. As I walked in through the front doors, there's literally, I don't mean this is a joke, there's a sign, this building is condemned. They were going to tear it down. That's where they sent me to my first meeting. The ceiling is fluttering down. There's a bunch of people that I don't think were sober yet. I mean, it was really something else, and I thought, do you see what happens to you when you drink too much? This is the way you get to be. This is what AA is. And I thought, oh, God. I had to cover my coffee for fear of what had fallen in it and all this stuff, just, geez. But I figured, that's what happens to you. You're a drunk now, and you're an Alcoholics Anonymous, and this is the way it's going to be for the rest of your life. But I heard people. They started telling things about themselves. Dear God, you shouldn't talk about them in public, They started telling about, and then they started telling about men that are big, strong men, telling about being afraid and about lying. You don't tell people those things. And they were talking about them around this table. And I began to think, God, that guy feels just like me, but I better not let him catch on, and I began to just feel, but all of a sudden it began to come to me. And then the next day came, and I didn't drink, and I went to a meeting. And the next day came, and I didn't drink, and I went to a meeting. And something happened to me about 3 days later, and I look at Clem down here, because we both know this guy real well. I was sitting down at the table just like this, and I had my big book out in front of me. I just finished my dinner, and a guy come along, and he tapped me on my back, and I thought I stood up calmly. He said later that he almost had to scrape me off the ceiling, because I don't think I did anything calmly during that first week. I mean, in fact, they tell me that the concrete has a rut in it where I walked back and forth, all this. But anyhow, I stood up, and the guy said, "How you doing, Father?" And I thought, oh, God, he knows me. Jeez. But I couldn't remember his name, and of course you can't admit that you can't remember somebody's name, because that doesn't look good, if you know everything. And so when I'm looking at his name tag, because he worked at the hospital, and then I saw his name, Ed, and then it dawned on me, and I said, oh, fine, Ed, how are you? And his name was Ed. And we visited for a little while, and it was kind of nice. And I said, well, it's real nice to see you. I kept lying right up to it. It's real nice to see you, good. And he started to walk away, and he said, see that book down there? And I thought, well, I'll give him a few instructions since I'm his priest. I said, oh, yes, that's the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. He says, I know. It saved my life for the last 23 years. And that's how God sent me my sponsor. And I said, oh, my God, there's one in the parish. Now there's about 40 in the parish. But anyhow, that was Ed. And Ed was something real special in my life. I really believe this. I think God knew that we had a real difficult case here. They made up this KISS, keep it simple, stupid, for me. And God knew that this I was going to rationalize and intellectualize and do all this junk, So he sent me Ed. And Ed would tell me stories. He'd say, well, and we'd just sit down. He was not one of these Clancy-like sponsors. He was much more obnoxious in another way. And he would say to me, I once had a priest over here at St. John's who was real drunk, and he was sitting in the car with me, and he said, and I told him, Father, now, it's easy for you to stay sober. All you got to do is you just realize that you're powerless over alcohol, and then you realize that God can take care of you and make you well again, and then you turned over to God. And he said, and the poor priest, he said to me, don't you tell me about spiritual things. I know about spiritual things. I went and studied theology, and I'm a priest, and I'm ordained, and I know more about spiritual things. And I said to him, well, Father, I guess you're right. I think you do know more about spiritual things. But let me ask you, if you know so much about spiritual things, how come you're drunk and I'm sober? And we both laughed, But I knew who he was telling the story to. I knew real well. And that's the way Ed was. I'll continue with him because he was so good. But he wasn't a very good sponsor, really. He was... Because when I'd have a problem, I would go to Ed. And my problems are serious and big and demand a great deal of attention. And I'd call him on the phone, Ed, can I come over and see you? He said, yes, come right over. And I'd come over, and I'd sit down, and they don't understand me, and they're getting on my back. And he'd say, well, yeah. You go to a meeting tonight? Did you read the book? Yeah, I had something like that one. He never had any good ideas. It was just go to a meeting, read the book, and don't drink. Never told me one thing to do to better problems. Just don't drink, go to meetings, and read the book. I don't know why God didn't help me better sponsor. I just got a guy like that all the time. But anyhow, you know what I mean. That's how he treated me. It was very subtle. At least he just pushed. Well, anyhow, I'm in this treatment, and it came time. We did a thing called what they call the first step, you see. And it's really the first three. Now, I'm not real well at all at this point. And so I decide, we sit around in a group of people. Everybody had been telling their stories about what they were like, and it's supposed to be very confidential, and I'm like a damn fool, believe them, and all that, And so I'm sitting there, and it comes my turn, and I didn't have enough sense to know you're not supposed to take your fifth step in front of a crowd. God, I hope those people stay sober. But I sit down, and I tell them the whole thing. I tell them, and right in the middle of it, it dawned on me. You are the most ungrateful, proud, obnoxious, awful person that ever existed. You are so ungrateful. And probably the most sincerely and for the first time in my life, I remember this, I just cried out, my God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And I think that was really my moment of clarity. It was my fifth step. It just, zoom, there it was. You are an ungrateful SOB. And geez, it hurt. But you know, as bad as it hurt, and it all of a sudden just, it felt good. And gosh, I felt, it was off my back. It was off my back. And I came out of there, I waltzed out of there, I felt so good. I'd never cried so hard and felt so good in all my life. And I felt a new freedom. And it was so, I didn't have to fake you out on who I was anymore. You knew I was. I was a drunk. I was an alcoholic. I lied, I cheat, I steal, I'm angry and impatient and all these things. And I went out of there, and Edie said to me, okay, Bernie, now don't forget, go to meetings, go to meetings, go to meetings. And I went home, and thank God she drilled me. And the first night I was home from that hospital, I 12-stepped somebody and went to a meeting. And I remember I got home, and she said, go home and do your 6th and 7th step. And for me, that 6th and 7th step took me a long time to learn. I'm going to share with you how I worked this thing, and it took me a long time. Because the way I heard the 6th step was, became entirely willing, or entirely ready to get rid of my character defects, and then humbly ask God to help me remove them. That's what I heard, And so I got ready. Of course I was ready. I wasn't going to be, I'm a saint now. I don't drink anymore, And so I went back to my parish, and I started, and I became entirely ready to get rid of all my character defects. Now I will work on them. And I still lied, and I still cheated, and I still stole, and I still was rotten, and I didn't know what was wrong. I didn't know what was wrong. And I began to become very obnoxious about this being sober. And I began to 12-step everybody in Fresno. It didn't make any difference whether you drank or not. I was going to 12-step you, and you were going to hear about the program. And I ran all over and told everybody. All my sermons were about, it was just awful. It was just terrible. About 10 months down the line, a bunch of people came to my office. They were going to fire my ass out of there. They were really upset with me. Geez, I was just becoming terrible. And they came in and they said, you've changed. And I said, when? They said, when you went in that hospital. And I said, oh, well, thank God it's working a little bit. But I used to blame them. It was me. I found that out. I heard Clancy say up at Yosemite that this thing is not about me getting better. It's about them getting better. And boy, is that true. I'm amazed at how my parish has grown in spirituality and humility and everything since I've gotten sober. It's obviously my advanced leadership with them. But I can see that now, and I began. But that night, I will never forget. My sponsor, Ed, told me, he said, you read that page 43. You read the bottom of that thing, and you remember that. And he told me a story about him, how he had prayed and he didn't drink. And that thing, says there will come a time when you will have no effective mental defenses against the next drink. It will depend upon your relationship with your higher power. And I went to bed that night, and they had told me they were going to fire me, and I wasn't too sure, and they wanted my, and I'm all hooked up about this thing, and I was, and resentment, the number one killer. I sat there, and I'd say, you dirty, I was a profound coward. I never punch anybody, but I'll get you. That terrible feeling. It was awful, awful, awful. I was only 10 months sober, and I sat there, and I thought, and then I'd say, oh, God, grant me the serenity, and then that'd last about 10 minutes, and then, and finally I knew I had to go to bed, and I kept saying the serenity prayer and saying it over and over and over and over and over, and finally I went to bed, and I said, please, God, help me, and I went to sleep, and I didn't go to sleep, and the old tape started going, I'm going to get you, I'm going to get you, and the thought came to me, I know how I'll get you. I'll go get drunk. And thank God, right behind it came, talk to somebody. And I leaned over and I punched Madonna and told her, get up and talk to me, and she had her first 12-step call right in the house. And I didn't drink that night. It took me 4 years to realize that I had no effective mental defenses that night. It was the prayers that saved me. It wasn't me. That's when God stepped in and says, you can't make it, sucker. I'm going to save you tonight for sure. And he pulled me through it. And it wasn't those people. It was me. It was me. I was still trying to run everything. and doing all this stuff. Well, I began to find out. Now, I'm going to tell you something about how I worked the 6th and 7th step and how it worked in my life, and I beg of you, please do not think I'm taking your inventory. I'm taking mine, because this was an absolute character defect of mine. On March the 4th of 1981, I was smoking about 3.5 packs of cigarettes a day, and it was going up. I really smoked. And it was hurting me. I don't care what anybody else has done. I'm talking about me. It was hurting me, and my voice is important to me and my business, and I don't want to die and all those things, and I just could not control my smoking. And it was getting bad. They tasted bad. I didn't want to smoke. I wanted to quit smoking, and I'm gonna smoke until I have this carton finished. And I'd always run out right in front of Safeway, and well, I'd run in and get another one, just like the booze, I just couldn't. And I got a guy in my parish that's just a good friend of mine, and he used to come up to me and say, "You smoke too much, and I'm praying for you. I'm praying for you." And I wanted to punch him in the mouth because I couldn't. I was addicted to this, and I just couldn't quit. Well, on the 4th of March, the day before that, which was Tuesday, I was laying in bed, and I'm thinking, tomorrow is Lent, because this was Tuesday before Ash Wednesday. And tomorrow's Lent, and I'm telling all the people that they should give up something for Lent. And then the thought came to me. I didn't think it. Be nice if the priest gave up something for Lent. And I thought, oh, God. What'll I give up for Lent? And, geez, I knew. Oh, geez. Quit smoking, dummy. Oh. And then I said, and this is what I believe humbly means in that 7th step, because I didn't want to smoke anymore. And I said, I can't. I just can't quit. If I'm going to quit, you're going to have to do it. Will you please help me to quit? And he said, of course, just quit and use the program. And so I quit just for today. And now I work my program on it. He does it, I do the footwork. And it's kind of like Johnny Harris says, if you want to quit smoking, don't smoke. If you want to quit lying, don't lie. And I hate that damn simplicity, but that's the way it is, and I had to do it. And so I worked the program on that, and it's dawned on me, humbly means, Bernard, you can't do anything on your own. If you want it done, you ask God to do it. You don't ask him to help you. You do it. You tell him, he does it, and you just do the footwork. And so the way it works with me, and I'm just going to tell you what happens to me. What happens to me is I try to be ready to get rid of the character defects. And I, to the best of my ability, ask God, say, I can't do it, will you please do it? And then I try to do it as best he helps me to do it. And the degree to which I'm willing, and the degree to which I humbly ask him and admit I can't, to that degree he takes it away. And so I don't quit lying completely, but I don't lie nearly as much as I used to. And I'm not as ungrateful as I used to be, and I'm not as proud as I used to be. But I believe those steps are working well enough that I'm not drinking today and I'm sober today. And to the best of my ability today, where he's got me, I'm trying my best to work those steps. I got my list. I try to go through it. I'll never forget the first one. I don't recommend making... In fact, I tell anybody that I work with today, for God's sake, don't do any amends till you talk to your sponsor, because you know me, I'll screw up a 2-car funeral. I'll let myself off the hook when I should be on and put myself on it when I should be off. And so I always wish now I talk to a sponsor before I go do them, but except for little ones like saying I was wrong, which I don't like to do. But anyhow, I remember going home to Chicago the first year I was sober, going to that sister-in-law's house. Can you imagine what a thrill that was? And she came out the next morning, I said, Carol, sit down. She said, what? I said, I got to tell you something. She said, oh, Bern, you don't need ice. Yes, I do. Sit down. I got to do my program. She looked at me like I was some kind of nut, And I don't think that's the way you do it, but at least I think I meant well. And I try to the best of my ability. And the 10th step for me is a very difficult one, because it's a word change for me that, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. I hate that word, wrong. I could get an Academy Award for telling you how sorry I was. That night, oh gosh, guys, I am so sorry that I've hurt you by my drink. I can really I can put you in tears telling you how sorry I am and never tell you I was wrong. The word that I'm having a hard time with, though, is promptly. It's about 3 days now. I'm in somewhere in that area. But it's getting better. It's getting better. And I'm beginning to able to say it. I even said it to my little grandchildren the other day after a little episode. Grandpa was wrong. Forgive me. And I do try to do that. What it says in the book was a big revelation to me on page 86 there, where it says, you know, when we retire at night, it took me a long time to understand this, but when we retire at night, we constructively review our day, you know, and I start reviewing the day. Did you do this? Did you do this? And I'm, yeah. Did you do this? Yeah. Did you not do that? Oh, God. And it gets horrible, you know. And then they have that silly little sentence in there. But we must be careful that we do not get into a lot of remorse, guilt, and so on. And I say, why not? If you had a day like mine, you'd be guilty, remorseful, and morbid thinking. It'd be just terrible. And then it says in there, and I'm hearing it a lot more lately, you know, because that would interfere with our being of service to others. And boy, did I hear that at the convention. Service and love, service and love. And so I do to the best of my ability what I do today, if I can, you know, as I say, God, I'm wrong, forgive me, and I accept it to the best of my ability. I'm never going to do it perfect. And I get out of that 10-step as quick as I can and get into 11. And I'll tell you, as being a priest, that 11th step is a real help to me, because I'll tell you, it was really tough while I was drinking to control the whole world, because I had to decide whether Aunt Mabel was supposed to get better and who got a job and where it rained and where it didn't, and instruct God thoroughly on how he was to run his world. And today all I got to do is ask for his will and the power to carry it out. And I used to think that was a real easy step. A year ago last March, I wanted something. Oh, God, I wanted it bad. And of course, I didn't want it for myself. It was for my family and for others, not for me. And I prayed to God, dear God, being a good member of the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous and knowing how to work the 11th step properly, I'm only asking that if it could possibly be your will that you would let this come to pass, please, dear God. And I know very well that if you don't want me to have it, why, it's okay. It's okay. I accept it as a member of the fellowship, and I accept it, dear God. Your will is the only thing that matters in my life, because I practice these steps for peace and serenity and joy and happiness and freedom. So whatever you want, God, but if you'd like to know how I feel about it, I really would like a yes answer on this thing. And on the 10th of March, 1984, God answered my prayer. He said, no. Oh, geez, I was furious. I got in my car after several phone calls. I made references about people's marital status and background and their children that should have never been made, and consigned them to places that I know God won't send them. And I drove all the way to Yosemite. I just ranted and raved and screamed, and I heard, and I wouldn't let go, because it was that guy who interfered. And when I hurt enough, I said, Bernard, you are wrong. And boy, that 11th step isn't easy to practice. I have found that out. And you know, 6 months ago, I said it still hurt. It doesn't hurt anymore. I think I've let go of it, and I said to Clem tonight, you know, it had something to do with where I wanted to be. And I said to God, I said to Clem, I'm getting nervous. I'm comfortable where I am. God, I wonder what he's got in mind. But anyhow, that 11th step is a big help to me. Because there are two parts to it, too, that are very important to me. Number one is, what do you want me to do? And the other part is that I know what he wants me to do. It's what comes down in front of me. But to give me the grace and the power to do it, because I can't do it. You know, and it sounds kind of bragging, and I don't mean it, but I think I have had somewhat of a spiritual awakening because I've worked these steps some, because my personality has really changed. In fact, I brought my daughter back with me and from vacation, and she said, Dad sure is different. He's even funny now. And I thought, oh, thank God, you know. So it's working a little bit. It's working. I'm getting a little better. I am not perfect. Boy, I'll never forget the first night I heard the 5th chapter read, and I heard it tonight, you know, right away. Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence. What we're looking for is growth and not perfection. And so to the best of my ability, as God gives me the chance to do so, I try to carry the message. And the message is very clear to me, you know. I admitted I was an alcoholic and my life had become unmanageable. And I sure as hell couldn't do anything about it. and that God could and would if I'd ask him. And so every day, and every single day, I ask him, please, God, keep me sober today. And every night before I go to sleep, I say, thank you, God. Thank you for letting me be sober today. I love AA with all my heart and soul. Dear God, I love it. And I saw a couple of you stand up and say you were newcomers tonight, and if you ever, or even if you're an old-timer, it doesn't really make any difference. I heard Clancy say, you know, that drinking is the way out. Please don't take the way out, because I need you. Because you're here tonight, I think I'm going to get to stay sober today. I'm pretty sure of it. And I need AA, and I need you, because I can't do it by myself, and I really love it. You see, in the back of that little pamphlet, A Member's Eye View, there's a story in the end of that, and it says that when John the Baptist was in prison, he sent a bunch of guys to Jesus, and he said, are you the one, or should we look for something else? And he never answered the question. He said, go back and tell John that the blind see and the deaf hear, the lame walk, the poor in spirit hear the good news, and the dead rise to life again. Well, on January 21st, I was as blind as a bat. I couldn't see anything. And I couldn't hear anything except my own self-will and my own big mind telling me what to do. And I was lame. I couldn't walk. I couldn't do anything for anybody. I was losing everything. And I was like a dead man. I know how Lazarus felt when he came out of that grave. And I sure as heck had forgotten what the good news was. Because I didn't know any love, I didn't know anything, and I sure didn't know my God. And because of you, because of AA, because of the fellowship, this day I don't have to drink. And if any of you were ever thinking to find a way out, please don't go, because I need you too bad. I can't make it without you, and I love you. And it doesn't make any difference whether I know you personally or not. It doesn't make any difference because I make a decision to love you. Because without you, I won't stay sober. I thank God for AA. And I thank AA for giving me back my God. And I hope and pray to God I never forget to say thank you again. Thank you.